It is so hard to avoid the jargon that we use when talking about games that we like, especially when talking about mechanics or how a game feels to play. We're gonna fall into using terms like worker placement, tableau building, dice drafting, and like this seems so second nature to me and probably you if you're an experienced board game player. But if you're new to the hobby or don't spend much time consuming an obscene amount of content like I do, it can take a while to like pick a lot of this up through osmosis. And so I think we can do a better job at providing more resources to help people get up to speed with the terminology that we're using in our videos, because I think that these are tools to help us better find more of the games that we like. We can see through similarities and through these terms what other games are out there that share these common threads. And so today I'm going to be talking about my favorite mechanical in this new series that I'm going to be calling Meet the Mechanic. Today I'm talking about deck building. So I'm going to go over an overview of how we think of deck building and like what kind of bucket we would define it as and how we would classify a game as being a deck builder or not. And then I'm going to give you 5 recommendations from our library of deck builders that I really enjoy. And if you are already familiar with deck building, or if you see the similarities between our explanation with games that you've enjoyed, then please share your recommendations below, because I love a good deck builder. And if you want to be screaming from the rooftops about the games that you enjoyed, then please do share below, because I would love to expand our deck building collection. Because despite my loving deck builders so much, when I looked through our library for all the deck builders that we have shockingly few, given that it's probably my single favorite mechanic. Okay, so what is a deck builder? Because when we talk about mechanics, it's often for games to have their own adaptation of mechanics or to put a twist on the genre. And deck building is no different. So I'm going to talk about the common threads of what I would expect to see in a deck builder before then talking about some of the other like smaller details that are common, at least throughout the games that I have at this table. Starting off with the most common thing in a deck builder is that you're going to have your own selection of cards, like your own deck of cards that throughout the game you're going to be able to mutate and transform in some way, in that you can add or remove cards to your deck. And the reason why this is usually important is throughout the game you're going to be drawing from that deck to complete some kind of action or use them as a resource or use them in battling. And so the purpose of being able to add and remove cards from your deck is to give yourself better options or combinations and set up your own unique strategy throughout the game. That is at its core what I would consider to be a deck builder. So within this there are going to be some terms that we often use as well to refer to those actions I just spoke about. So one of them is called card shedding, or deck pruning is often used to refer to the removal of cards from your deck, because you're trying to avoid drawing cards that either impact you negatively, maybe you lose points at the end of the game if you still have them, or they're just not very synergistic with the rest of the cards in your deck because you're trying to have like combos or complementary cards that help each other. Or maybe you're just trying to thin your deck, which is another term that's used, so that you can get to those good cards quicker. And so whilst someone who might have a thick deck, you might be like, oh, that's a lot more cards, that's better. That's going to take you longer to get through to the cards that you do want to play. And so there are different strategies to each, and each game is going to have different like viable ways of getting the kind of victory conditions that you're looking for. And so I'll touch on that a bit more as I go through some of these specific recommendations. And so I'm going to start off with the simplest deck builder in our collection. And if you're new to deck building, this might be the one to start for you, and that is Fort. Thematically, this one might put some people off if you are into like very competitive style games, because in this, you are kids building a play fort, really. And it sounds so innocent, but the themes and mechanics of this game are so delightful. Just like I described in Fort, you are building your own deck, and you start with 2 best friends, and then I think it's 8 other random cards. The reason why the 2 best friends are distinctive is that throughout a round, you're going to be able to play cards on your own turn, but also other people's turns to join in their... It's a bit like a trick, and trick taking is something I'll get to in a separate video, but needless to say, some of your cards you can play in other people's turns, and some of them you can play in your turns. However, when you get to the end of your turn in that round, if you have cards left over, they go into your front yard, and there's a risk that you'll lose those cards because other people can recruit from both your cards and the central marketplace. However, your best friends return to your deck. In this game, you are playing a single card by default, and some cards can have their benefits multiplied by the number of cards you can play of the same icon. And so that's one of the kind of synergies that you'll be looking for when building your deck. You might be going for a lot of the same icons, or looking for cards that have multiple of the same icon on the card in order to maximize a specific effect. Or you might be going for a wider variety of icons so you can more easily participate in other people's turns. This is quite competitive, and there is a couple of very small like mean mechanics if you're sensitive to that in multiplayer games, but this is such a great entryway into the deck building hobby, and so that's why I wanted to share that first. I'm now going to go to the complete other end of the spectrum, to what I think is one of the greatest board games, to be honest, let alone deck building games, and that is, of course, Slay the Spire. Now, this was my gateway, I think, to deck building. And my first experience with this was playing it digitally. And if you've only played digitally or you've only played physically, there are so much similarities. There is a lot of overlap, but they are, in my opinion, very different experiences still. Namely, before the second game digitally came out, this had multiplayer first, and so that alone felt very unique. But also, there are just different strategies that open up to you based on the kind of cards and abilities and the scale of numbers that you're working with in the board game version. What's great in this is how you are building up your deck over time in Slay the Spire, and getting rid of those cards that you don't want, the card shedding, is so much more powerful, but also harder to get to in Slay the Spire, which makes every time you have an opportunity to add cards to your deck so much it's a much more impactful decision, and you need to be much more careful with when you introduce cards to your deck, because it's probably going to be quite tricky to get rid of that card if you ultimately decide that that was a bad call. And so sometimes when you have the opportunity for a reward, it is actually quite a viable strategy to just pass up on that and say, nope, I don't want any card actually, I'm just going to skip on by and wait for the next opportunity. Another great thing about Slay the Spire is that there's a high amount of asymmetry in this game, and that there are, at least in the board game version, 4 different characters that you can play as, and they each have their own unique deck. And so if you play this like solo or even 2-player, you could have like a complete experience playing this and then come back and have a completely different experience just with a different deck. Never mind the fact that the decks are huge, and like I said, you could only go through like a quarter of your own character's deck in a single playthrough. And a single playthrough in this game, if you're going through all 3 acts, is like 4 or 5 hours. I love this game, and one thing that's I think is worth noting in this game is that because this is such a big playtime, the box is designed so well that you can play through an act and you can pause the game. It has an insert that is designed for you to be able to pause the game and resume later on, and so it's easier to pack away and resume. I love the attention to detail in the game design experience of this, and it's why when I consider a new deck building game, everything kind of compares to this. This is the baseline for me. The other thing that's worth noting that I probably should have said a bit sooner is that all of the games in this list, yes, are competitive, meaning you're playing against others at the table, and whilst you might not directly be fighting them, you're certainly competing against them. Whereas Slay the Spire here is cooperative, and so this was one of the first games that I got to play with Madeline, where we were completely working together and still having such a really exciting, stimulative experience, because most of the other cooperative games that we played have been a bit more narrative focused and maybe less mechanically enriched in the optimization puzzle that I really appreciate in games. So that's Slay the Spire. If you want to know more about that, we might make a dedicated video on it, but this is here for the purpose of deck building recommendation, and so I'm going to move on to the next one. And I'm going to go through the next one pretty quickly as well, actually, because whilst I've heard a lot about it, I have not played it yet, and you'll see that because it's still in the Cling Film wrap, and that is Clank. Now, the reason I have this is because of another game on this list made by Direwolf, and so I already have such high faith in this publisher, never mind the praise and acclaim that the Clank series gets. It's already on its 10-year anniversary, still selling well, has great expansions, and admittedly, this is the game I know least about on this list. All I know is that deck building is so core to the game that it's on the box, and you are completing a heist against a dragon in a dungeon. And I'm recommending this based on solely faith, so if you know about this game, if you would recommend it yourself, please do add more context below, because I'm looking forward to trying this. I'm waiting for Madeline to get back from her trip before I do. So that is Clank. So I think it makes sense to do the next Direwolf game now on this list, which is Dune Imperium. Now I've used this box in like 4 or 5 videos now, but I've still not played the Uprising variant. I've only played the base Dune Imperium game, so TBD on this specific version. But as I said earlier when explaining the deck building mechanic, oftentimes there'll be like a twist or an adaptation of the mechanic in a different genre, and this one here, whilst it is very much deck building at the core, it's also combining it with worker placement. And so whilst in Slay the Spire and Fort, like the majority of your game time is spent like optimizing and using your deck directly, in Dune Imperium it takes a little bit more of a back seat. And whilst you're building your deck in order to afford the kind of actions you can take, your worker placement and your resource management is just as important. Because in Dune Imperium, you are drawing cards from your deck, which tells you where on the board you're able to place a worker. However, if you don't play that card on your turn, there are also some resources that you get at the end. Usually swords to help you in the fight at the end of that round, and or currency to purchase more cards for your deck. And so you have to balance between, do I want to leverage this card to complete an important action this turn, or do I need it for other purposes at the end of the round? Like, do I need it to be able to afford a new card in my deck? Because you can see which cards are currently in the marketplace, even if another player could beat you to the punch by ending their turn early. And so for me, this was quite a novel use of deck building in a game, complemented some of the other mechanics that they used. And so I'll probably bring this up more when talking about things like worker placement in the future. And again, once we play Dune Uprising, we're probably going to do a whole dedicated video on this because we've spoken about Dune Imperium a lot, but still not done any dedicated content on it yet. And so once we play Dune Uprising, I'm sure we'll have more to say on that. So that is Dune Imperium base game. Dune Imperium base game. I was about to say Uprising. So up next is the newest game in our collection, and that is Drillers. Now, I only have the top of the box here because I'm about to try the solo mode because I've played this at 2 and 4, and I have quite high hopes about the solo play mode as well in this. Drillers is another game that, like Dune Imperium, combines two different mechanics. In this case, it's combining deck building with resource management. Another mechanic I'll talk about in a separate video. However, here I'd say the deck building is a bit more of a main player than the resource management. In Drillers, you're diving down into the bottom of a mine to drill for gems, and then you're taking those gems back up to the surface where you sell them for gold, and that gold you can use to purchase cards to upgrade your deck, or you can directly upgrade like parts of your mech to improve your capacity. What I like about the deck building mechanic in this is that similar to Dune Imperium, you have like two sides of the card. One part you have the fuel cost and abilities, meaning you have to pay the fuel cost to use it, and then you get the following abilities, like you get drill resource, or you get to flip over some drones. I'm not going to go into the full gameplay in this video alone, because we're going to make a dedicated video very soon on this, once I play the solo mode as well. Needless to say, you are spending fuel, one of your main mech resources, in order to complete some actions. However, on the other side of the card, it tells you how much fuel you get for discarding it. So I could choose to either spend fuel to activate these abilities, or I can discard it to get fuel. And so every turn, you are drawing cards, and you're deciding which one of these am I going to like actually get to use, and which ones am I going to discard for the fuel. Or you can set up turns where you're going to have so much fuel that you could use all of them in one turn. And so this kind of sets the stage for one of the reasons why I really like deck building, because similar to engine building, another thing I'll talk about in the future, you really get to introduce your own asymmetry by crafting your own strategy throughout the game and getting to know your deck so that you can be like, I've trimmed my deck down to be this tight, small like wedge of cards where whilst I don't know the exact order of them, I know that I haven't drawn this specific card yet that allows me to do a really cool action. And so I know it's going to come up soon. And so I'm going to invest in my fuel and make sure that I'm ready to capitalize on that when it comes. And then bam, it comes my next turn, and I'm able to like fully utilize things. Ultimately, what I'm trying to say is you get so much agency in this game, and there's a lot of payoff that you can really strategize around. And whilst there's just enough like luck and randomness to have a bit more of excitement in this game, it doesn't come at the cost of like your agency or feeling unfair. If you've ever played games like Heat, the like racing game, then you'll be familiar with how cards like Heat itself, like the Heat card, can be introduced into a deck to force you to make harder decisions, like, okay, I need to get rid of this heat, but I also need to go faster around after this next turn. And so like, I'm going to risk discarding that heat and I'll have to deal with it later. But you could also just keep introducing more heat into your engine. There's a lot of like similar vibes in this game. However, you have much more control over what you introduce to your deck beyond just heat. Because in this game, there are damage cards, which feel just like heat cards. Again, I don't want to go too deep into like the overall gameplay of this game because we do really want to make a dedicated video soon. So just let us know in the comments if you're particularly interested in this. In fact, all of these games here we need to make dedicated videos on, so let us know which one here you would be most interested in hearing more on. So just a little recap, because I think that's all of the games I have to share. We have Slay the Spire, the OG GOAT, like the baseline for all deck builders in my opinion. We have Fort, a really great entryway into like the deck building hobby, like mechanic, you know what I mean. Then we have Clank, which I'm recommending purely based on reputation and recommendation and a really trust for Direwolf. So we'll be playing that ourselves in the next couple of weeks. Then we have Drillers, which is the newest game in our collection, and I'm already in love. This is such a unique entryway into the hobby. Then we have Dune Imperium Uprising. Oh, wow, we got such a variety here. And so if there are any games that you expected to see in this list, or if there are any deck building games that you really enjoy and want to recommend, then please do leave it below. I would love more recommendations because I would love to saturate our collection with more deck builders. And as always, if you want to see more content like this, then please do subscribe, drop a like. It really means the world to us with the support that we've been getting on this channel. We started this YouTube channel because we are absolute yappers at heart, and short form is so hard for us to keep actually short. And so if you want to see more yapping videos like this, then you know what to do. I'm not going to keep banging on about it. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and yeah, I'll be back with another mechanic video soon, hopefully. It feels so weird ending these without Madeline. She's abandoned me today. Bye!